The atrium of Lang Dynamics glowed under the morning sun. 200 employees stood in a half-circle, coffee cups cooling in their hands. Victor Lang adjusted the cuffs of his Brioni suit, the Italian loafers gleaming like fresh oil on blacktop. He pointed one finger at the man in the faded coveralls. "You're scrap. No value here. Take your toolbox and disappear." Elias Rowe didn't flinch. He simply nodded once, bent down, lifted the dented metal box, and walked out through the glass doors while the entire staff watched in silence. Someone in the back actually laughed. He had no idea the man he had just humiliated in front of the entire company was the only reason Lang Dynamics hadn't already collapsed. What was hiding inside that rusted toolbox? 3 years earlier, Elias had been just another night shift mechanic clocking in at 10 p.m. and out at 6 a.m. single father to 9-year-old Mia. 2-bedroom apartment on the corner of 14th and Elm where the radiator knocked like an impatient fist every winter morning. His wife Claire had died in a car accident on the rain-slicked interstate, leaving behind a folded letter he still carried everywhere, grease-stained now, tucked inside the lid of the toolbox that had traveled with him since the army. The dismissal stung worse because Mia had watched the live stream from her third-grade classroom. She texted him at 9:12 a.m. with a single sad face emoji. He stared at it in the parking lot until the screen went dark. Day 1. Elias sat on the edge of Mia's bed that night, the room smelling of strawberry shampoo and cheap laundry detergent. She clutched her stuffed giraffe, the one Claire had bought her the week before the crash. "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" He brushed a strand of hair from her eyes. "We've been through worse, kiddo. Remember when the power went out for 4 days? We made s'mores on the gas stove." She gave a small smile, but her eyes stayed worried. He kissed her forehead, closed the door quietly, and walked back to the tiny kitchen table. The clock read 11:47 p.m. He opened his laptop, the blue glow cutting across his tired face. At 2:14 a.m., the emergency line buzzed. The prototype drone on the south test runway was failing mid-tax. Telemetry flatlining. 2 engineers stood under the hangar lights arguing in low voices. Victor's prized Falcon X project, worth $41 million in pending contracts, was about to become very expensive scrap. Elias appeared without being called. Coveralls still on, toolbox in his left hand. He didn't ask permission. He simply knelt beside the open access panel, the smell of jet fuel thick in the cold air. One unlabeled circuit board slid out of his toolbox. One identical-looking board, etched with a tiny delta symbol no one had seen in years, slid in. For seconds later, the drone systems chirped back to life. Green across every display. One of the younger engineers watched the whole thing from 10 feet away. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Elias met her eyes for half a second, gave the smallest nod, and walked back into the shadows before anyone else arrived. He left the scent of burnt coffee behind in the break room. The pot had boiled dry hours earlier. No one had bothered to turn it off. Day 2. The company burn rate was running at $41,000 a month above projections. Victor Lang stood in the same atrium at 10 a.m., Patek Philippe flashing on his wrist, telling investors the Falcon X would revolutionize drone delivery. He never mentioned the near catastrophe the night before. Elias sat in seat 12A on the red-eye back from a supply run in Dayton. On his lap, the toolbox. Inside it, the folded letter. He didn't open it. He never did. But he ran his thumb along the crease the way other men rubbed worry stones. At 6:47 p.m., he made spaghetti in the cramped kitchen on 14th and Elm. Mia pushed noodles around her plate. "You didn't go to my school play," she said quietly. The sauce smelled like home and regret. "I know, baby.
I'm sorry."
Something came up at work. She looked up at him with Claire's eyes. "Are you still getting fired?" He smiled even though it hurt. "Already fired, kiddo. But we're not done yet." Day 3. Invoice number 7742 arrived on Victor's desk. The propulsion test results had suddenly improved by 18% overnight. No explanation on the report. Elena Voss read the numbers twice, tapped her manicured nail against the paper, then filed it under lucky break. Elias worked alone in the subbasement server farm at 3:12 a.m., the hum of cooling fans loud in his ears. He replaced a failing relay no one else even knew existed. The fix took 11 minutes. When he was done, he wiped his hands on the same rag he'd carried since 412 combat hours over Kandahar. The rag still carried faint traces of desert sand if you knew how to smell it. He kept the toolbox close. The letter inside never left. Day 4. Victor held another all-hands in the atrium. Italian loafers spotless. Brioni suit perfect. He announced record pre-orders for the Falcon X. The same staff that had watched Elias walk out now clapped on cue. Elena stood 2 steps behind Victor, frowning at her tablet. Another unexplained performance spike. She started keeping a private log. Elias watched the live stream from the parking lot, engine idling, Mia's forgotten lunchbox on the passenger seat. The smell of cold French fries filled the cab. He didn't smile. He simply opened the toolbox, looked at the letter one more time, and began typing routing numbers into 3 different shell company accounts. The debt had started to move. Day 5. 19 hours until the first quiet share purchase cleared. Elias stood on the roof of the Elm Street apartment building at dusk, wind tugging at his jacket. Mia's giraffe was tucked under his arm. She had insisted he take it for luck. Below him, the city lights flickered on one by one. Somewhere in that grid of concrete and glass, Victor Lang was probably pouring expensive scotch and congratulating himself on another flawless day. Elias closed the toolbox with a soft metallic click. Inside, the letter waited, and the company he had secretly built from nothing was about to start paying interest. The letter waited. Day 6, 2:47 a.m. The server logs showed another silent recalibration. Cooling fans whirred like distant rotor blades. Elias knelt between 2 racks, the same grease-stained rag now wiping condensation from a circuit board that had been scheduled for replacement 6 months from now. 11 minutes again. When he stood, the faint scent of Afghan sand rose from the cloth, mixing with the sterile ozone of the basement. He folded the rag once, tucked it into his back pocket, and left the way he came, through a service door that had been painted over before Victor Lang ever wore his first Brioni. The toolbox rode beside him in the truck. Mia's giraffe rested on top of it, one plush ear bent from where she had clutched it during last night's nightmare. The letter inside the box never moved, but the numbers on the screen of his encrypted laptop did. 3 more shell accounts received wire transfers at 3:14 a.m. The debt ticked upward, quiet as snowfall. Day 7. Victor stormed into the executive conference room at 9:02 sharp, Italian loafers clicking on polished concrete. The morning brief had just landed. Propulsion efficiency up another 9%. Unexplained. Again. Elena Voss stood at the head of the table in a charcoal pencil skirt, her Patek Philippe catching the overhead lights. She slid the report across to him without a word. Victor's jaw tightened. He slapped the folder down. "Find the leak," he said, voice low and sharp, "or the next person walking out that door will be you." Elena's manicured nails paused mid-tap. She met his eyes for half a second longer than protocol allowed, then nodded once. Later that afternoon, she pulled the private log from her drawer. 12 entries now, each one time-stamped with performance anomalies no engineer on payroll could account for. She stared at the dates. Something itched at the back of her mind, like a name half-remembered from a late-night briefing 3 years earlier. Elias felt the pressure building from 4 blocks away. He sat in the idling truck outside the Elm Street laundromat, Mia's giraffe on the dash, staring at the timestamp on his phone. 19 hours until the next share block cleared. The smell of fabric softener drifted through the open window, almost enough to cover the diesel and old fries. He opened the toolbox, lifted the giraffe gently aside, and read the letter again. The paper was soft now from handling, creases deep as canyon lines. Signature at the bottom still trembled where his hand had shaken after the final mission. He closed the lid with a soft click. Then he made one call. The voice on the other end answered on the second ring. "Call signs still good?" Elias asked. A pause.
Ghost actual.
"Never retired it. Need a shadow audit on Lang Ventures Holdings." Quiet. 48 hours. Done. The line died. Elias exhaled once, the way he used to before rolling out of Kandahar at first light. The giraffe watched him with its single-stitched eye. Mini-crisis hit on day 8. Victor canceled the Falconex supplier contract at 10:17 a.m. The parts Elias had secretly rerouted through 3 dummy corporations suddenly had nowhere to land. $2.4 million in components now sat in a bonded warehouse on Pier 17 with no owner on record. If the shipment was flagged as abandoned, it would trigger an automatic audit. The kind that peeled back corporate veils. The kind that could expose the routing numbers Elias had spent 5 nights feeding into the system. Elias learned of the cancellation through a terse text at 11:03. He was changing Mia's tire on the side of Route 9 when the phone buzzed against his thigh. The little girl sat on the guardrail swinging her legs, humming the same song she always did when the world felt too loud. He read the message twice. Then he looked at the toolbox in the truck bed. The rag, the letter, the giraffe now tucked safely in the cab. 17 hours until the next share purchase cleared. He worked the tire iron with steady hands, torque wrench clicking in precise quarter turns. The smell of hot rubber and brake dust filled the air. When the spare was mounted, he drove straight to the warehouse district, arriving at 1:44 p.m. A single forklift operator owed him a favor from the old days. 15 minutes and $300 later, the container was quietly relabeled under a new shell entity, Crisis Contained. But Elena's private log now had a 13th entry, Warehouse Manifest Anomaly, Pier 17. Day 9. Victor's voice cracked across the open office floor at 8:30 sharp. "I want every server log from the last 10 days on my desk by lunch." His Italian loafers looked less spotless today. A faint scuff on the left toe that no one but Elias noticed on the security feed. Elena stood 2 steps behind him again, arms crossed, the Patek tight against her wrist. Her frown had deepened into something closer to suspicion. Elias watched the live stream from the parking lot once more, engine off this time. Cold coffee sat in the cup holder next to Mia's giraffe. The plush toy's neck was starting to fray from repeated handling. He opened the toolbox, touched the letter, and rerouted 2 more accounts. The debt was now $41.7 million deep and moving faster. But the new mini-crisis arrived at 4:12 p.m. A junior systems analyst named Patel found the relay Elias had replaced in the sub-basement. He brought the old part upstairs like a trophy, laying it on Elena's desk with the reverence of someone who had just solved a murder. "This should have taken the whole grid offline," Patel said, voice tight with excitement. "Someone swapped it out. Someone who knew exactly which relay controlled the Falconex throttle mapping." Elena picked up the blackened component. It still carried a trace of the rag's oil. She smelled it without thinking. Desert sand and something metallic. Her eyes narrowed. For the first time, she whispered a name she had buried years ago.
Ghost actual.
The words were barely audible, but Elias, listening through a back door he had never told anyone about, heard them clear as rotor wash. He sat up straighter in the driver's seat. The letter in the toolbox suddenly felt heavier. Day 10. 19 hours until the second tranche of shares cleared. Elias stood on the same Elm Street rooftop at dusk, wind whipping harder now. Mia's giraffe was under his arm again. Its stitched smile faded from weather and worry. Below, the city lights flickered on in their perfect grid. Somewhere in that grid, Elena Voss was staring at a server log that should not exist. Victor Lang was pouring another scotch, trying to convince himself the numbers were still his. Elias closed the toolbox with the same soft metallic click. The letter waited inside, patient as a sniper. The company he had secretly built, the one whose original patent still wore his name under 7 layers of holding entities, was about to start collecting the next installment. He looked at the giraffe, ran a thumb across the frayed ear. "Almost time to go home, kiddo," he said quietly. The debt had grown another $9.3 million by midnight. Day 11. The all-hands meeting was moved to the main hangar. Victor arrived at 9 o'clock exactly, Brioni suit pressed to razor edges, but the scuff on his left loafer had been joined by a second on the right. Elena stood beside him holding a fresh folder. 13 performance spikes, 2 warehouse anomalies, 1 relay that should have crashed the entire test program. She didn't speak the name aloud this time, but her private log now carried a new heading in small, careful handwriting: Kandahar-era signatures. Elias worked alone again at 3:19 a.m. in the sub-basement. This time he replaced a firmware chip that controlled the entire telemetry uplink. The fix took 9 minutes. When he finished, he wiped his hands on the rag, inhaling once, letting the desert sand and old cordite fill his lungs. The toolbox sat open on the concrete. Mia's giraffe guarded the letter like a tiny sentinel. He typed 4 new routing commands. The debt ticked past 52 million. 12 hours until the next share purchase cleared. A fresh mini-crisis landed at dawn. The bonded warehouse on Pier 17 received an unscheduled visit from a Lang Ventures compliance officer. The newly relabeled container had been flagged. If it was opened, the manifest would show parts that matched Falcon X serial numbers exactly, parts that Victor had canceled himself. The audit would begin in earnest. Elena would be forced to dig deeper, and the name on the original patent drawings was about to surface whether Elias was ready or not. He received the alert while making Mia breakfast. The smell of burning toast filled the small kitchen. The giraffe sat on the counter watching him read the message. Elias turned off the stove, looked at the toolbox by the door, and made another call. Same voice, same call sign. Need a ghost shipment moved tonight. Pier 17 to the private airstrip at Morris County. No paperwork. Ghost actual. You sure about this pace? Elias looked at the letter inside the open toolbox. The trembling signature. The date stamped 2017. I'm sure. He hung up. The giraffe's head tilted slightly as he closed the lid. Day 12 was coming fast. The hangar meeting had already been scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. Victor would stand in front of the same staff again. Elena would watch with sharper eyes. And somewhere in the slow drip of unexplained fixes, the first thread of Elias's real identity was beginning to pull free. The letter waited. The rag still carried sand. And the debt, patient, procedural, unstoppable, kept rising one quiet wire transfer at a time. The bonded warehouse smelled of diesel and damp pine. Elias arrived at 2:47 a.m. wearing the same faded Carhartt jacket, toolbox in one hand, Mia's giraffe tucked into the side pocket like always. The night crew had already cleared the dock. A single halogen hummed overhead, casting long shadows across the concrete. He moved between the newly relabeled containers with the calm of a man who had done this on 3 continents and 2 wars. The compliance officer's bright red tag still dangled from container 441B. Elias sliced it free with a utility knife, the plastic snapping like a brittle bone. Inside, the crates were stacked exactly as he remembered from the original 2009 manifest. Falcon X telemetry boards, guidance actuators, every serial number a perfect match to the ones Victor had personally crossed off the budget 2 years earlier. He swapped the manifest clipboard with a fresh one from his toolbox. For signatures at the bottom now read Kandahar Era in the same faded ink. The giraffe watched from the open lid, its stitched eyes steady. Elias closed the container, clicked the new lock, and stepped back into the darkness. The debt crossed 58 million at 3:12 a.m. He drove home before the gulls woke up over the harbor. Day 12. The hangar smelled of fresh coffee and expensive cologne. Victor stood at the head of the long table in a charcoal Brioni suit, Patek Philippe catching the light every time he gestured. Elena sat 2 seats away, tablet open, eyes narrowed behind her tortoiseshell glasses. 23 engineers and mechanics filled the rest of the chairs. The same faces who had watched Elias carry his cardboard box out of the building 6 weeks earlier. Victor tapped the projected slide. These phantom fixes are bleeding us dry. Telemetry uplink stable for 37 straight hours? Impossible unless someone is rewriting core code we don't even own anymore. His Italian shoes clicked as he paced. We're looking at sabotage or incompetence. Either way, heads will roll today. Elena's pen stopped moving. She was reading the new compliance report that had landed on her desk at 7:05 a.m. The warehouse audit had been quietly rerouted. No red flags, no serial matches, just another ghost entry that somehow balanced. She glanced toward the back of the room where Elias now sat in the last row. Nondescript, coffee cooling in a styrofoam cup. Victor noticed the glance. Something to add, Elena? She closed the tablet. The numbers don't add up, but they also don't not add up. A low chuckle moved through the room. Victor's smile was thin. Still defending the janitor, I see. Elias didn't flinch. He simply reached into his jacket, pulled out the same oil-stained rag, and wiped a non-existent spot from the table in front of him. The faint scent of desert sand and cordite drifted across the first 2 rows. One older mechanic in the corner inhaled sharply, then looked away. The meeting ended at 10:47 a.m. with Victor assigning 3 new task forces. As the room emptied, Elena lingered. She walked straight to Elias. You're doing this, she said quietly. Not a question. Elias folded the rag once, twice. I'm fixing what he broke. She studied his face. Who are you, really? He looked past her to where Victor was laughing with 2 board members near the coffee station. Someone who used to sign his name on the patents your boss claims don't exist. Elena's cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Victor called her name from across the hangar. She left without another word, heels clicking faster than usual. Elias stayed until the last person was gone. Then he walked to the far wall where the original Falcon X prototype hung under a dusty tarp. He pulled the tarp back 6 inches. The faded stencil on the fuselage still read Ghost Actual, 287 missions. He let it fall again. Back in the subbasement at 1:19 p.m., he replaced a failing power regulator that controlled the entire ground station link. The work took 11 minutes. When he finished, he wiped his hands on the rag and let the smell anchor him. The toolbox sat open. Mia's giraffe stood guard over the letter, the trembling signature from 2017 still visible beneath its plastic sleeve. A new alert buzzed on his phone. The private equity firm that held 41% of Lang Ventures had just received an anonymous packet. Inside were scanned copies of the original ownership transfer documents Victor had forced through legal on a Friday afternoon in March. The signatures didn't match the ones now on file. The difference was subtle, but to someone who knew what to look for, it was a lit fuse. Elias read the message twice. Then he made another call.
Ghost Actual.
Need the secondary server farm isolated before 2200 tonight. They're about to run a deep forensic trace on the uplink logs. The voice on the other end exhaled. You're painting a target on your own back, sir. I know what I'm painting. Elias looked at the letter. Just get it done. He hung up. The giraffe's head had tilted again when he closed the toolbox lid. Day 13 was already breathing down his neck. 19 hours until the next share purchase cleared. The second mini-crisis arrived at 4:52 p.m. in the form of a surprise visit from the FAA compliance auditor. Victor had called her in himself, convinced the sudden reliability of the Falcon X test flights had to be the result of illegal software patches. The auditor, a woman named Carla Ruiz with a steel gray bun and zero tolerance for nonsense, arrived with 2 junior inspectors and a stack of warrants. They headed straight for the telemetry bay. Elias was already inside when they entered, He was on his knees behind the main rack, fingers moving through color-coded cables like a pianist. The smell of hot solder and burnt coffee hung in the air. Carla stopped short when she saw him. "You're not on the access list," she said. Victor stepped in behind her, triumphant. "Exactly. This is the vagrant I told you about. The one who keeps breaking in to fix things that weren't broken." Elias stood up slowly. His hands were steady. The rag hung from his back pocket. He didn't speak. Instead, he reached past Victor and handed Carla a single sheet of paper. It was an old FAA Form 337 dated 8 years earlier. The approval signature at the bottom was his own, the one that had once cleared Ghost Squadron to fly black missions out of Bagram. Carla's eyes widened a fraction. She recognized the authorization stamp. Very few people on the planet had ever seen that particular stamp. Victor snatched at the paper. Elias let him take it. "This is fake," Victor snapped, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. The Patek on his wrist suddenly looked too large for the tremor running through his fingers. Carla looked from the form to Elias, then to Victor. "I need to make a call." She stepped into the hallway. The 2 junior inspectors stayed behind, uncertain. Victor's face had gone the color of old ash. Elias simply returned to the rack and finished seating the new regulator. The click echoed in the quiet room. When he was done, he wiped his hands, folded the rag with ritual care, and placed it back in his pocket. The desert smell lingered. Elena arrived 6 minutes later, summoned by Carla's call. She stood in the doorway watching the scene like someone who had just realized the movie had changed genres halfway through. Victor tried to regain control. "This man is clearly tampering with proprietary." "Mr. Lang?" Carla cut in, returning with her phone still in her hand. "The signature on this form is legitimate. I've seen it before, on documents that don't officially exist." The words landed like a blade. Victor's mouth opened, closed. For the first time in the entire ordeal, he looked directly at Elias without the mask of contempt. What he saw there made him take one involuntary step backward. Elias closed the panel on the rack. The system rebooted with a soft chime. All telemetry indicators flipped from amber to steady green. He picked up the toolbox. The giraffe's head poked out just enough to be seen. "Day 13 tomorrow," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then he walked past all of them, boots quiet on the polished floor. In the parking lot at 6:03 p.m., he sat in the driver's seat of his old pickup and watched the sun bleed across the river. The letter rested on the dashboard now, unfolded. The signature at the bottom still trembled after all these years. The one Victor had forced him to sign the day they stripped his name from every patent, every mission log, every future royalty. Mia's giraffe sat on the passenger seat, threadbare neck tilted toward the letter like it was listening. Elias touched the faded ink with one finger. The debt had just crossed 64 million. 14 hours until the next wire cleared. And somewhere inside Lang Ventures' main server, a new log entry had just appeared under the username that had been dormant since 2017.
Ghost Actual.
The slow leak had begun. The pickup's engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound in the empty lot. Elias stared at the letter until the words blurred. He folded it once, twice, and slid it into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt, right next to the rag. Then he started the truck and drove east along the service road that hugged the river. Day 13 began at 4:47 a.m. with the smell of burnt coffee and the low hum of backup generators. Elias was already inside the sublevel server farm beneath Lang Ventures' main tower. The night shift technician, a kid named Ruiz, had fallen asleep in the control chair with his earbuds still playing. Elias stepped over the snoring form and knelt beside rack 17B. The same giraffe's head watched from the open toolbox like a silent sentry. He worked without hurry, one cable at a time, one firmware patch. The keystrokes were muscle memory from missions that had never been declassified. By 5:22 a.m., the dormant account Ghost Actual had ingested another 2.4 terabytes of proprietary flight telemetry. The numbers on the debt counter ticked upward in the background of his mind. 67,412,000. At 7:15 a.m., Victor arrived on the executive floor wearing a charcoal Brioni suit and the same Patek Philippe that had once belonged to Elias's father. He was barking orders into a Bluetooth earpiece when Carla intercepted him outside the glass conference room. "Sir, the overnight logs show an anomaly in the secure partition." Victor didn't break stride. "Define anomaly." "An old credential. One we revoked 8 years ago. It just authenticated from inside the building." Victor stopped so suddenly his Italian loafers squeaked on the marble. The color left his face in a single sweep. "Show me." They stood together at the monitoring station while the screen filled with lines of green text. Victor's jaw worked. He reached for his phone, then stopped. The debt counter in Elias's hidden ledger had just crossed 69 million. Elias spent the rest of that morning in the motor pool behind the tower. Day 13, Hour 9. A fleet of prototype delivery drones sat idle under tarps that flapped in the desert wind. The chief mechanic, a thick-necked man named Kowalski, was cursing at a diagnostic tablet that refused to boot. "These things are toast," Kowalski growled. "Lang says scrap the whole batch. 280 units at 400 grand apiece." Elias set his toolbox down. The giraffe's worn ear brushed the concrete. "Mind if I look?" Kowalski laughed once, short and bitter. "Be my guest, old man. You can't make it worse." Elias removed the access panel. The smell of overheated lithium and desert dust rose up. 43 minutes later, the entire fleet chimed in unison. Every diagnostic light turned emerald. Kowalski's mouth hung open. "How the hell?" "Somebody remembered the original checksums," Elias said. He closed the panel. "Tell Mr. Lang the drones are flight ready. And tell him the patch is signed Ghost Actual." Kowalski paled at the name. Elias walked away before the questions could start. Day 14. 2:14 a.m. Elias sat on the tailgate of his truck in the employee parking garage. The letter was open again on his knee. The giraffe rested against his thigh, its button eye missing. He reread the paragraph where Victor had smiled and said, "Sign it, or your daughter never sees another birthday." The ink still looked wet under the garage lights. A new text arrived on the burner phone he kept in the glove box. One line. They found the first breadcrumb. 19 hours until the wire. He deleted it, closed the letter, and drove home to the single-wide trailer on the edge of the dry lake bed. Mia's old room was exactly as she had left it the week before the accident. A smaller stuffed giraffe waited on the pillow. Elias placed the larger one beside it, then lay on the couch with his boots still on. Sleep came in fragments, each one filled with the sound of rotor blades and the smell of jet fuel. Day 15 opened with a boardroom crisis. Victor stood at the head of a long walnut table while 12 directors stared at a projected balance sheet that refused to reconcile. The missing 69 million had now become a visible black hole. "Where is it going?" one director demanded. Victor's voice was tight. "We're tracing it." The door opened. Carla entered carrying a single sheet of paper. Her hands shook just enough to make the corner flutter. "This just printed from the secure printer in sublevel 3. No one authorized the job." Victor took the page. At the top, in the same trembling signature he had forced Elias to use years earlier, were 3 words. Payment schedule attached. Below it, a simple table. Day 17, $4.2 million. Day 19, $7.8 million. Day 22, $11.4 million. And at the bottom, a single line in the same ghost font. Total remaining, $91,347,000. Source, Ghost Actual. Victor's Patek caught the light as his wrist trembled. For 3 full seconds, the only sound was the air conditioner whispering overhead. Elias watched the scene from a utility closet one floor below, the feed streaming to an encrypted tablet. He closed the app, folded the letter he had been holding, and placed it back in his shirt pocket next to the rag. The giraffe's head brushed his knuckles as he lifted the toolbox again. Day 16 brought the first real panic. At 10:07 a.m., the entire Lang Ventures satellite constellation lost lock. 6 birds, each worth $42 million, went dark over the Pacific. Victor was in the middle of a live investor call when the screens froze. His polished voice cracked on national television for exactly 4 seconds before the feed cut. Elias stood on the roof of the adjacent parking structure, wind whipping his flannel, watching the antenna array through binoculars. He had spent the previous night adjusting only 3-phase arrays. Enough to prove the point, not enough to cause permanent damage. Yet, he spoke quietly into a handheld radio that shouldn't have worked on that frequency. Ghost Actual to control. Reacquisition window opens in 90 minutes. Stand by for new uplink codes. The reply came back through his earpiece. A voice he hadn't heard in 8 years. Copy Actual. They're sweating down here. Elias lowered the binoculars. The letter in his pocket felt heavier than the toolbox in his hand. He descended the stairs, each boot fall echoing like a countdown. By 3:40 p.m., the satellites were back online. Victor canceled every meeting and locked himself in his corner office. Through the glass wall, Elias could see him pacing, tie loosened, the Brioni jacket thrown over a chair. On Victor's desk sat a single printed page. The same trembling signature stared up at him. At 6:12 p.m., Elias was changing the oil in the company's aging backup generator when Carla found him. She carried 2 cups of coffee and a look that said she had stopped pretending she didn't know. "You're him," she said simply. "The one who built the original flight stack." Elias wiped his hands on the rag, folded it with the same ritual care, and returned it to his pocket. "I was." Carla's eyes flicked to the giraffe protruding from the toolbox. "That toy. I've seen it in old photos. Your daughter." The words landed like gravel in his chest. Elias nodded once. He closed the generator panel. The engine caught with a healthy rumble. "Tell him the next wire clears at midnight," he said. "Tell him the account name is still the same one he buried." Carla swallowed. "He's scared, Elias." "Good." He lifted the toolbox. The giraffe's head nodded with the motion. "He should be." He walked into the gathering dusk. Behind him, the generator purred steadily, as if the machine itself had chosen a side. The debt now stood at $78 million. The letter in his pocket was warm from body heat. And somewhere in the server logs, Ghost Actual had just added another line of dormant code that would wake up on day 19 and ask a very simple question. Who really owns this company? The desert night smelled of diesel and cooling asphalt as Elias descended into the parking garage. Level -3 was empty except for the echo of his boots and the faint metallic tick of the toolbox swinging at his side. The giraffe's worn plush ear brushed his wrist with every step, a quiet reminder of Mia's laughter in the old control tower. He stopped beneath a flickering fluorescent tube and waited. Victor arrived at 9:33 p.m. exactly. The Brioni suit had been traded for a black cashmere overcoat, but the Patek still caught the light like a warning. 2 bodyguards hung back by the elevator, hands inside their jackets. Victor's Italian shoes clicked once, twice, then stopped 10 feet away. "You're enjoying this," Victor said. His voice carried the faint tremble of a man who had read too many clauses in too short a time. Elias said nothing. He simply lifted the giraffe into the light, turned it so the faded stitching along its neck showed. Victor's eyes narrowed, then widened in slow recognition. "Day 1 of the countdown," Elias said quietly. "You still think this is about money?" He turned and walked toward the service stairwell without another word. The toolbox clinked softly behind him. Victor stood motionless until the steel door hissed shut. Then he exhaled once, sharp, and the bodyguards moved in to flank him like they were afraid the concrete itself might turn against them. The bonded warehouse smelled of diesel and damp pine. Elias arrived at 2:47 a.m. wearing the same faded Carhartt jacket, toolbox in one hand, Mia's giraffe tucked into the side pocket like always. The night crew had already cleared the dock. A single halogen hummed overhead, casting long shadows across the concrete. He moved between the newly relabeled containers with the calm of a man who had done this on 3 continents and 2 wars. The compliance officer's bright red tag still dangled from container 441B. Elias sliced it free with a utility knife, the plastic snapping like a brittle bone. Inside, the crates were stacked exactly as he remembered from the original 2009 manifest. Falconex telemetry boards, guidance actuators, every serial number a perfect match to the ones Victor had personally crossed off the budget 2 years earlier. He swapped the manifest clipboard with a fresh one from his toolbox. For signatures at the bottom now read Kandahar Era in the same faded ink. The giraffe watched from the open lid, its stitched eyes steady. Elias closed the container, clicked the new lock, and stepped back into the darkness. The debt crossed 58 million at 3:12 a.m. He drove home before the gulls woke up over the harbor. 3 weeks later, on a warm Saturday afternoon at 2:30 p.m., Elias sat on the same shaded bench across the street from the tower. The giraffe rested in Mia's lap now, dry and clean. Its stitched smile turned toward the building where her father's name had finally been restored to the brass plaque in the lobby. Victor Lang walked over from the main entrance. No Brioni today, just a plain gray jacket and jeans. He stopped a respectful distance away. "I sold the penthouse," he said. "The proceeds are in an account for Mia's education.
No strings.
I stepped down as chairman. The board voted you in this morning. They want you to lead the defense division. I told them the decision is yours." Elias looked at the man who had once dismissed him and saw something new in his eyes. Not fear anymore, but the weight of a debt finally understood. Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out the old rag, freshly laundered and pressed. He offered it like a truce finally earned. "I kept this. Thought you might want it back." Elias took the cloth. For the first time in 8 years, the tremble in his hands was gone. He folded the rag once, tucked it into the toolbox, and closed the lid with a soft click. Mia giggled at something the giraffe said and leaned into her father's side. The late sun warmed the bench while the city moved on around them. In the end, the tower still stood. The patents still protected the nation's most sensitive systems. The company still carried Victor's last name on the stationery. But everyone inside those glass walls now knew exactly whose hands had built the foundation, and whose quiet competence had never needed a Brioni suit to matter. Some debts are paid in money. Others are paid in public recognition and in private apology. Elias Rowe had collected every cent. And in doing so, he reminded every person who witnessed it that the man you dismiss as scrap metal today may be the only one who knows how to keep the whole machine from rusting apart tomorrow. The rag, once a symbol of erasure, now rests framed beside the letter in the lobby of Lang Dynamics. Visitors sometimes ask about the faint oil stain that refused to wash out. The tour guides only smile and say, "That mark? That's where the real story began."